Hi everybody, today we're going to be embroidering on a Kimberbell Snap Tray. This package that I have has two, mint and navy. I'll be embroidering on the navy today. I'll link this below. They call this embroidery leather, but it's a PVC product, so it is not an animal product. We're going to be using the free Creativity Blooms design. I'll link that below for you as well. We'll go step by step through the whole project. The first thing I did was print my instructions. It's just 2 pages. It's this page and then a back page. There are 2 pieces of applique. There's a large flower and a small flower. And then I went through the instructions and I marked off my threads. So as I'm progressing through the design, I know which thread to use. I just wrote a thread color by every step. For my large flower, I have this fabric. And for my small flower, I have this fabric. These are both Fairy Frost fabrics. They came from a fat quarter bundle that I have called the Rose Quartz Fat Quarter Bundle. You can still find that if you search online. If you type in Rose Quartz Fairy Frost, you'll find it. I've picked colors from my thread wall, and as I switch each color, I'll go ahead and show them up close on camera so you can see the thread number. I'll be using a regular 7511 embroidery needle today. Kimberbell does suggest the 7010. I don't have any. I've embroidered on their embroidery leather before with these needles and not had a problem. I've put the fusible backing on the back of my 2 pieces of fabric. We're going to use the wash away sticky back in our hoop today. And then we're also going to use the wash away topping. So if you've never used these before, we'll go over how to use these. If you've never stitched on the embroidery leather before, I have a couple videos on my channel dealing with the embroidery leather. I have the how to embroider on the fabric tote, and then I also show you how to make a cute little bag using the practice piece of embroidery leather that's included with the folding storage tote. Let's open up our snap tray and then set up our hoop. Here's what the tray looks like. You embroider on the part that's going to snap close, because you're going to snap close the corners and you'll see this design. The design will show through on the back. We'll be covering that at the end with a piece of felt. The design I'm using today will work in a 5x7 hoop, but when you set the tray on it, it's bigger than the hoop, which is fine. You're going to be using a sticky back stabilizer. You'll be able to sticky it, but for me, it's going to be a little bit easier to use a larger hoop. This is an 8x8 hoop, and that fits right inside. I'm going to put the wash away sticky back in that, and I'll show you how to use that, and then I'll show you how to center your project before we start stitching out. If you've never worked with the wash away sticky back, it's definitely different than other stabilizers. It's got this paper side and this side that feels like fabric. When you put it in your hoop, you want to put paper side up. This roll that I have is 12 inches by 5 yards. On this hoop, the 8x8 square, if I roll it out this way, it's not going to get caught in my hoop on the top and bottom. It'll get caught just on the sides. So I need to roll it out this way and hoop it this way. That's one disadvantage to using the larger hoop. I am going to use more stabilizer than if I used a 5x7 hoop, but I think this hoop is going to be easier for me to work with, so I'll be using the larger hoop. I'm going to measure out how much stabilizer I need, make sure I'll be able to pull it through at the top and on the sides and then on the bottom, and we'll go ahead and cut that. Separate your hoop, paper side up, fabric side down. It's a little weird. Just get it centered in there and make sure your hoop is nice and loose so you'll be able to push this down. If you can't, like this, if you can't push it in, loosen your hoop a little bit more and then get that pushed down. And go ahead and hand tighten and screwdriver tighten. Before I go any further, I'm going to talk briefly about centering the project in the hoop. You can absolutely 100% eyeball it and get it centered that way. That's usually how I do things. But what we'll do today is we'll make the marking in the hoop and the marking on our project, and we'll get it centered. So before I peel off this paper and expose the sticky, I'm going to set it aside. I'm going to take my tray. This is the side I'm embroidering on. I want to flip it to the back. If you measure this tray, it's 8 1/4 inches square. That means half of that is 4 1/8. I have a ruler that does show 1/8 marks. So if I measure 4 1/8, line it up along this side, I'm just going to use my fingernail. Remember, you're on the back side. I'm just making a little indent. You'll see it on the embroidery leather. You can use chalk as well. And then I want to measure 4 1/8 on this side. That's 4 1/8. Use my fingernail again. And I've got a little X on my tray. It may be hard to see on camera, but I can see the indents. Let's get this ready to go over to the machine. We have to peel the paper out of the hoop. Use some scissors, kind of scratch, or if you've got a little stiletto or seam ripper or whatever, and go all the way around. What you're doing is just scratching it so you can peel the paper, and then you want to get all the paper out. That's good enough. I'm not worried about that. Let's go ahead and take this over to the machine, and we're going to stitch the crosshairs in the center so we can center our project. I'm on a baby lock meridian. My files are on USB. We'll go ahead and bring up the Creativity Blooms. You'll see that there's 2 files. We're going to use this one right here, the centering crosshairs. Go ahead and set that. I have a generic neutral thread on my machine. It really doesn't matter because we're going to put the tray on top of it. This is just to help us center. My crosshairs have stitched out, and I don't know if you saw it, but my thread got wrapped around the needle and stuck, and it tore a hole in the stabilizer. See that? If that happens, grab a couple pieces of paper tape. This is going to wash away. Your tray is going to sit on top of it. So anything that's here that doesn't wash away or underneath that doesn't wash away, it's not going to matter because we're going to cover the back with felt. I want to make sure this will be secure. I'll put a piece of tape here and a piece of tape here. Now that hole is covered. When you stitch your crosshairs, if you decide to do this, you could leave the paper topping on. It might make it a little more difficult to peel off, but you could always try that. Normally, like I said, I just eyeball it. I remark this using some chalk. You want to match up your cross with the cross there. You would line up where your lines cross here and where the lines cross here. You can also do it this way. I've got this centered, or at least as close as I could get. What I ended up doing was sort of rolling it. It's really stuck now because I gave it a push. But I almost bent it in half so I could see the line on the stabilizer and then the line on the back, and then just rolled it and smoothed it. You want to make sure, again, you've got the pokey part of the snap facing up, because if you don't, you're on the wrong side. Remember, you're going to close these corners, so double check, make sure you've got this set. Grab your wash away topping. This is what that looks like. Again, I'll link all the stabilizers below. If you've never used this before, it's almost like saran wrap. It's just a thin plastic. We're going to cover the whole piece. And what this does is help prevent the stitching from sinking into the embroidery leather. I've used this when doing the folding storage totes, and I've not used it. I haven't seen a difference, but since it's my first time doing one of the trays, I'm going to go ahead and use it today. It all washes away at the end. Make sure if you're making these, if you're thinking of like a last minute gift, you have to wash away the topping, and you have to let it dry, and you have to glue the felt on the back, so make sure you allow time for that. Just push it down. It's going to stick to your sticky back stabilizer that's in the hoop, and then I'm going to trim that off. Now I don't have to add tape because it's sticking. If you're doing this in a 5x7 hoop, you want to make sure this is taped down. It does not have to be perfectly smooth. It's going to wash away. So just get it in your hoop. Again, if you were using a 5x7 hoop, you would want to make sure that this is taped down and secure. We're ready to start our stitch out. Let's bring up our file. If you have the instructions, you'll notice these instructions are very abbreviated. If this is the very first thing you're doing by Kimberbell, their instructions are usually a lot more detailed than this. This was made for Kimberbell Day. The first thing we're going to stitch out are the leaves. I've picked this green color. It's kind of a sage green. I'm using Sim threads today. That's the color number. I changed my needle to a new 7511 needle. I've got my green thread on my machine, and my machine is not at full speed. Check the speed of your machine. If you're running full speed, you want to slow it down. I'd say probably 20 to 30%. Let's go ahead and stitch out the leaves. The leaves are stitched. The next thing we're going to stitch is the placement line for the large flower. I'm going to be using this pink. It coordinates well with the fabric that I've selected. My placement line has stitched out. I've got my large flower fabric. I am going to add a piece of tape. I want to make sure to completely cover that placement line. I can actually press it right on that green embroidery so I don't have to worry about the wash away stabilizer. Once you've got that in place, you're going to stitch the tack down line. Once that's tacked down, you want to trim all the fabric that's outside the line. Be careful, try not to nick the wash away topping or accidentally tear it off. If you do, honestly, it's not the end of the world. You can put another piece on and tape it, don't worry about it. I've got my flower trimmed. I'm going to do the decorative outline in my pink thread. The next step is the outline for our fabric placement on the small flower. I'm going to be using a light pink. My placement line has stitched out. We're going to place our small flower fabric. Make sure you cover that placement line. I have this really light pink. You can add the tape right there onto that fabric and onto the leaf. That looks good. I think I've got that covered. Stitch your tack down. Once that's tacked down, go ahead and carefully remove your tape and trim outside the tack down line. Once your fabric's trimmed, stitch out the small flower decorative outline. The next step is the large flower detail. These are the stripes going through the large flower. They have that in a dark blue. I'm going to stitch mine out in white. The flower detail has stitched. The next is the large flower center fill, so the dot in the middle. I was originally going to use white, so now I'm looking at it and thinking I'm going to go with yellow and stitch the center fill. That's the center. Isn't that neat? That's a really nice textured looking stitch. I'm glad I switched to yellow. The next thing that's going to stitch out is the small yellow flower, and I am going to do that in yellow. Next, we're going to stitch out the center fill on the yellow flower. I'm using white. That's another really fun textured stitch. The next step are some small dots inside of this fabric flower. I originally picked white, and that's how it shows it in the design, but I switched it to yellow. Next, we have an orange flower. I picked almost like an orange peach. It looks a lot more orange on camera than it is. This is the color I'll be using. Next up is the center fill for the orange flower. I'm going to stitch that in white. Next up are the words, the creativity blooms. Got some nice hot pink here. What can I say? I like my pink. I'm going to use this color and I'm going to stitch out the words creativity blooms. Now is also a good time to change your bobbin. That's about where my bobbin is. It was almost full when I started. Let's talk about a problem with my stitch out. Do you see this? Let me show you what's happening. Let's look at the thread. This is what I usually use to keep the thread on the spindle here. What's happening is the thread is getting caught between the top of the spool and the little thread cap, and it's getting stuck and it's not pulling through the machine. This is another little thread holder that comes with this machine. So while I'm stitching out the rest, I'm going to switch to this one. Keep the spool on the machine, keep an eye on it, and hopefully that'll keep it from getting caught. I'm going to go to the back of my project and I'm going to try to gently seam rip this and just pull out these threads. That's about as clean as I can get it. This little bit down here was tacked. I think when the machine went between the letters, it went up and down several times here before it started. I don't want to risk puncturing the leather. Let me show you the back. I didn't put a hole in my stabilizer, so I don't feel like I need to add tape. I used snips, a seam ripper, and tweezers to try and get as much of this thread out as I could. I'm going to put this back on my machine, and we're going to back up to the first stitch on the I, last stitch on the T. On your machine, there should be a needle minus plus, plus minus, something like that. I'm going to go by ones. I can see my little crosshair. Let me zoom in. It's right there at the top of the I. So I want to back up until it hits the T and then go forward one stitch and start on the eye. I didn't realize it had stitched, it looks like almost all of the eye. Now I'm back on the letter T, so I'm going to go forward by ones until I see it move to the eye. There we go. Now I'm on the letter I. That's where I want to start. Let's cross our fingers and hope for an uneventful rest of our stitch out. Before I take this off my machine, I'm going to back up and I'm going to stitch over that gap right there in the letter S. I backed up my machine and I just stitched over a couple of these. That looks better. Let's get this off the machine and have a look at it, and then we'll talk about getting rid of the stabilizer. I'm going to take a minute, look at this really close, and get rid of all those jump threads. Let's start with the wash away topping. A lot of this is just going to pull off. So mine's stuck on the side. You can peel it up and then start pulling it off gently. Don't like really rip it. You've got all your nice stitching. You don't want to mess that up. Technically you don't have to do this. You can put the entire thing underwater, but I like to pull off what I can. I think I get a better result. So personal preference, I'm going to pull some of this off. I've got most of the big pieces off. The reason I really like to do that is because when you go to wash this off, it's sticky. So the more that I can get rid of before I stick this underwater, the better. Let's go ahead and take our project out of the hoop. Sticky back wash away. Remember, you can peel as much away as you like. This does not tear away like that topping does. I'm going to get my pair of scissors that I use for sticky things, paper, non-fabric things, and I'm going to trim the extra away from the back of my project. If you have a sticky back tear away or a sticky back cut away instead of sticky back wash away, that would also work, as long as you could trim it as close as you can get to your design, because we're going to cover this, so you're not going to see it. To get this removed, I'm going to fill the sink with water, set it, let it sit 15-20 seconds, and you start rubbing it and it'll come off. It'll just sort of disintegrate in your hands. But I want to show you, in case you have a project where all you're working with is wash away topping, how you can remove just the tiny little bits without having to soak your whole project. Grab some water. You can use Kleenex, paper towel, piece of wet fabric. I like to use sponge brushes, these things that you use for doing crafts. Let's get a little bit of water ready. You can use it, like I said, anything you want. Sponge brush, towels, fabric, Q-tip. You can go like this, and it just kind of comes away. If you feel sticky, you know you don't have it all washed away. But that's how you can remove little bits of this wash away topping. But for this project, we've got to remove all of the wash away backing, so the whole thing is going to get wet. I'm going to take this to the sink, fill it up with some cool water. Like I said, we'll set it in the sink, let it sit about 15-20 seconds, and just gently rub. This will all come off, and then you want your project to dry. I've got the stabilizer washed away. I've got a piece of felt. Let's talk about what kind of adhesive to use to attach your felt to the back. I've got quite the lineup here. I did a little research since we're attaching felt. The first thing I have here is a Sure Bonder high temperature glue gun. When you use a glue gun, the glue dries hard. That's something to take into account. When I researched using glue guns for attaching felt, most of the stuff I read said not to use a high temperature glue gun, especially if you're using craft felt or wool felt. It gets too hot and it can melt the felt. So we're not going to be using this today. I have some Mod Podge. I actually have a couple different kinds of this. This would probably work. The thing about using this is you would first have to put some under the felt and then attach the felt to the tray and let it sit and let it dry, and then you're supposed to go over it again to let it seal. This is going to take too long. I have some Eileen's fabric fusion glue. I also have a bigger container of this. I went to their website. When I read about the fabric fusion, they didn't recommend this for felt. They recommended their tacky glue. I don't have tacky glue. So if you have Eileen's tacky glue, it says on their website you can use that for felt. But since I don't have that, and I have this, and it says not to use it for felt, I won't be using this today. I have some E6000 glue. This is clear, transparent, and flexible. I use this for making jewelry. I know this will work. This does say to give it 72 hours to cure. This is an option. I have 2 spray adhesives. I have the generic Elmer's and then a Super 77. When I read about felt, and it talks about any kind of Elmer's or just regular glue product, craft glue product, not recommended for felt. This may work, but I'm going to go ahead and pass on that. This is Scotch brand Super 77. Bonds 2, fabric, cardboard, plastic, metal, wood, felt, and more. Strong bond. This is serious glue. I've used this for other things. I know this is going to work. I would say either one of these would be a good choice. I'm going to try the Super 77 today. When I use this, I'm going to do this outside. Let's go ahead and prep our felt. This is a piece of craft felt. It's not really that thick. It's not the best felt. It's kind of cheap. It is what it is. I'm going to measure the back, see what size of piece of felt I need to cover the backing of this design. So I'm going to cut my piece 5 by 6.5. Here's the back of my piece. This is 5 by 6.5. It does cover. One thing I notice, I've got some threads that are kind of sticking out. So when I go to glue it down, I either need to make sure they're all facing in, or I need to trim some of these threads. Let's grab our felt, our spray adhesive, and our snap tray, and let's head outside. We're out back. I'm using an old beach towel. I've got my spray adhesive. I would say if you're going to use this and you've never used it before, read all the warnings, read all the instructions. I'm going to spray the felt rather than spray the tray. I don't want to get a bunch of overspray on this. A couple of quick basics about this. It says to shake it well, line up your spray with the dot on the rim, and of course, spray it away from yourself. Don't spray toward. So if it's windy, take that into account. Make sure you're in the right direction. I'm going to spray this, and then while it's tacky, I'll pick it up and stick it to the back. Yeah, that's not going anywhere. I'm going to press down the edges. I do have some sticky on these fingers, so I'm using my other finger. I'm going to have to go wash my hands. Make sure it's nice and flat. I've got that all covered. Let's go inside and put this together and see what it looks like. Let's go ahead and put this together. So we've got our nice embroidery. I've got the felt on the bottom. All you do is snap the corners. One thing I've noticed about this design, it's a bigger design. If you left off the words, these sides would probably come in a little bit better if you want this to be more square than kind of rectangle. And it also has to do with my felt that's on the back, because it's curving, see right there? Right where this is, so this is holding it a little flat. But I love the way it turned out. These are great if you're traveling because you can unsnap them, have it flat, put it in a bag. So if you're going to an embroidery, quilting, or cross stitch retreat, they're great. You can set things inside of it. That way you don't lose things, especially if you're away from home. Maybe you're going to a Kimberbell one-day event. Put this in with your sewing machine, and then as you're working, all the little things you're working with can go in the tray and you won't lose anything. Let's get a close-up of the stitching. It came out really well. We had a couple bumps in the road along the way, which always seems to happen, but it looks fantastic. I love the way it turned out. I like the colors that I picked. I'm glad I went with the pink here instead of the green. These come 2 in a pack, so I still have one more that I can embroider on. Thank you for joining me today to make the embroidered Kimberbell Snap Tray. This was a product that was requested. If you've got a request for my YouTube channel, please leave it in the comments below. Please like, subscribe, share with your friends, and I will see you next time.